The Selma to Montgomery March was probably an accident waiting to happen. The governor, George Wallace, sent the highway director down to Selma to stop the marches. What George Wallace did not anticipate were the TV cameras. So the cameras and the pictures that were beating up John Lewis and Jose Williams crossing the bridge was one of the things that energized the public. Then also it happened on a Sunday afternoon when people were just getting out of church. Well, during that time, we was hoping that we'd get certain laws from the government on our side. So, but we did, beginning of that, we got a civil rights bill, a voting rights bill, and a Supreme Court decision. Those were the three major things that really changed the lives of black people and people in general at that time. Well, the march itself we had no idea that the march was going to be able to unify the black community as it did. Because before that time, we had no other examples of unity except the march. And then the leadership we had at that time was the Martin Luther King and other leadership and the highly educated people that really led the thing. And without the opposition of George Wallace, that it really dramatized it because he's the one that made an attempt to block the march. Transportation was one of the things that really emphasized the march and dramatized it was the South Jackson Cleveland Avenue bus. There's a large black population on the west side of Montgomery. There's a large black population on the east side of Montgomery. But the white folks that lived in Cloverdale were some of the leading whites, the bankers and the lawyers, and lived in Cloverdale, so they needed a large domestic help at that time. So they had to transport a lot from the west side of Montgomery to the east side of Montgomery. And on that particular bus, the one Mrs. Parks was riding on, Mrs. Parks did not violate the city order. The bus driver improperly enforced the city order. The city ordinance said if a black person actually give up their seat, there must be an available seat back for black. And vice versa, for a white person give up that seat, there must be an available seat front for white. So the day Mrs. Parks was arrested, when the bus driver actually, she was in the black section. They did not have white seats and black seats. She was in the black section. The bus driver told her to move, and she refused. The bus went one block and picked up a white man on Montgomery Lee Street, and then went another half a block and had Mrs. Parks arrested. That was the beginning. Then they arrested her, they charged her with disorderly conduct, and then that was the prosecutor charged her with. But what happened, she paid the fine, so they could not use her as a plaintiff in the case that went to the United States Supreme Court. Well, every black person in Montgomery, the color of your skin automatically make you a member of the organization. All black people had a role in it. And every black person ever been on the bus. What really energized me one day, I was on the bus and I saw a black lady get on, had a baby in one hand and a bag of groceries in the other. Then the bus driver, after she put the money in the slot, then the bus driver made an attempt to pull her off before she could get to her seat. But just so happened, a white man reached over in the white section and grabbed her to keep her from falling. Well, the leadership we had at the time was just by accident. See, when Martin Luther King had a degree in sociology from Morehouse College, and then had a master's in sociology ministry from Crozier, then he went and got a PhD in systematic theology from Boston Theological Seminary. So it was the leadership at the time, highly educated people who wanted to cause the success of the movement. Well, the thing that energized me the night at St. Jude Catholic Church, when Tony Bennett came out on the stage, and this lady was standing by me, she weighed about 350 pounds, and we was holding hands. And when Tony Bennett came out and said, "I left my heart in San Francisco," and the lady hollered back at Tony Bennett and said, "But you done found your soul in Alabama." That was the thing that really energized me more. That's the thing I remember. Well, the trail, it speaks for itself. I think business is not as I hope it to be on for the trail, because I don't see any really black business out of the three campsites that made any money off of. You got to have an income. You know, the biggest money now being made is like downtown with the big corporation. We can't fight the corporation, but they're the one making the money off it now. The only way you can make any money is to buy stock into the corporation. We're living in a real time frame. We do not have local control like we had back then. Race would kept us under control, but now we don't have that anymore. Basically, right now, it's money. Black people move in any section they want to go, Montgomery East, anywhere they want to go right now, if you got the money. Well, if telling the story now to our children, and I know that the present administration trying to keep the stories of race out of the public schools, and so corporate America is hard to fight because of the government program for right now is to keep the teaching of really what happened to it, even the slavery at the time. Well, I believe that we got to be organized in order to understand our problem. Then and now, our problem now is not what it was then. So in other words, the whole thing that made a major change, and we got to understand why did it make the major change. And I know that black people not going to some of the universities that they have a high spirit of going to those universities. And but then our schools are pulling the best out of our environment, and for them going to these top schools, that's another problem. Well, to make it more possible, all the things we do is get a better understanding why it's not as possible as it's supposed to be. And we got to be realistic because we do not have the know-how to develop it. See, downtown development, that's a big movement going on downtown Montgomery now, but it's basic for the future. But somebody's behind that, building those $1 million buildings down there and for future growth. And we got to be realistic about it because we cannot compete with corporate America, basically, especially as a race of people in Alabama. The black church played a major part. The church was the only organization we had where a large number of black people was in attendance, and it was organized to that effect, like the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, First Baptist Church. See, the first black church grew out of the white church here among the First Baptist Church on South Perry Street in the 1800s had 700 black members. In the late mid-1800s, the blacks in this basement of First Baptist Church on South Perry Street decided they wanted their own church. And the minister helped them get it and to build a church down on Ripley and Columbus Street. And they called it First Baptist Color. But then 10 years later, a lot of the educated members in that First Baptist Church decided they want that preacher to be better educated than called by God to preach. They wanted him to have been to university school to preach. And then later on, they built the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Then as that church, one of the most outstanding preachers of the 20th century was Martin Luther King and Vernon Johnson. And I was a student at Alabama State College. In 1954, I had a 10 o'clock class that morning. I never liked to cut another head. I was 20 minutes to the hour. I was going to a party that night, but money was running kind of short. But when I saw this 1954 Pontiac pull up in front of the barber shop, and I saw this young man get out, I looked at my watch, and I said, I could knock him out in 15 minutes. When he came in the shop, I asked him what his name, all this other crazy stuff. So then, after I finished cutting his hair, I gave him the mirror to say I liked the back of his haircut. So he told me pretty good. So that was kind of an insult. I thought I was the hottest barber in Montgomery, couldn't have the leading barbershop on the frontier. He told me pretty good. So I said, pretty good. He said, yeah, pretty good. I said, damn, who's this cat here? Think he's talking to? But he came back 2 weeks later. I was busy and the other barber was vacant, but he waited on me. So when he got in the chair, I said, that must have been a pretty good haircut. He said, you all right? I said, damn, but this cat, ooh, boy. That kind of an insult. So after I finished cutting his hair about 7, 8 times, I noticed he never give me a tip. So I said, Rabbi said, when you go to a restaurant, you have a nice meal and the waitress give you good service and you give her a tip. I said, don't you make her feel good? He said, yes. He looked at me and I said, do you put 10% of your earnings in church? I said, Rabbi, I cannot afford to put 10% of my earnings in church. He said, I'm the pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church and I can't afford to tip you either. So we had a very good relationship. After he came back and he asked me one day, he said, Nelson, how you been enjoying the civil rights movement? I said, Reb, I had one bad experience. He said, tell me about it. I said, shortly after the civil rights bill passed, I went home that night, I told my wife, let's go and check out the civil rights bill. So we decided to go to the Diplomat Inn on Norman Bridge Road in the Southern Bypass. So we go out to the Diplomat Inn, they had a restaurant, a nightclub, and a cocktail lounge. So me and my wife went into the cocktail lounge, and we had a round of drinks, and so a few minutes later, 4 white boys came to the adjoining table. And they would start drinking, so that whiskey then they started working, and my nerve was feeling pretty good. And so they had a live band, so one of the band members said, anyone want to make a request? Anyone want to make a request? And one of the boys jumped up and said, play Dixie. And boy, the band cut loose on Dixie, and one of them said, yoo-hoo, the ends are in here tonight. I got so scared, that vodka and cranberry juice, the eyes jumped out of the glass. I was shaking. So I told my wife, I said, baby, I think we better leave. She said, I think so. So when we got ready to walk out, the band played Bye Bye Blackbird. So Reverend King said, you thought that was bad? And I said, yeah, that was very insulting. The first integrated function I went to, Then they got ready to leave, the band played Bye Bye Blackbird. He said, let me tell you one thing. If you'd have went to that same place before the 64 Civil Rights Bill passed, that band would have probably played Swing Low, Sweet Cherry, or Come to Carry You Home. So the worst experience I had with Reverend King, he preached a sermon, one of the few sermons I remember about him, when he said, if you cooperate with injustice, it will incorporate you. He said we should stop going to the back doors of these places, dehumanizing yourself for service. You have enough eatery in our community to take care of our needs. But it was a restaurant on the corner of Fairview and Hope Street. During that time, there was no McDonald's and Jack's and GFC and all those kind of places. So, but you had to really go around to some of the white restaurants, you know, for service. So on this particular restaurant, on Hope and Fairview, it was a side door. You go there, you knock on the door, and you give your order, and you get 3 pieces of chicken, potato salad, English peas for $4.50, and tea and 1 roll. And you stand on the sidewalk until they get it cooked for you. And so that particular Friday night, we were standing, man, my boss man, we were standing on the sidewalk, and I looked up the street. See, Reverend King was nominated that morning at Hope Street at Mount Zion Church, and he gave his acceptance speech that night at Hope Street Baptist Church. And one of the most embarrassing moments of my life happened on the corner of Hope and Fairview. And so I saw that 1954 Pontiac coming. I said, dog, I told my boss man, both of us standing on the sidewalk. I said, one, that's Reverend King. He said, sure you. So I ran and jumped in the car. I said, come on. And by the time he got ready to come and get in the car, the lady said, your chicken is ready. So he had to make up his mind in a split second when he was going back and get the chicken with him. So he went back and got the chicken. By that time, the stop sign on the corner of Fairview and Hope Street, the Reverend King stopped. He knew we was in an embarrassing condition. So he bowed to the and Reverend King bowed in, so he pulled on off. And so the next Saturday night, Reverend King came by the barbershop. We had 10 customers on the bench and 3 in the chair. The barbershop was full. I said, doggone, there he come. He came in the barbershop. I hope he wouldn't say anything before the customers what he saw us do. So when I put him in the chair, he turned his face to the boy to wonder. He whispered to me, he said, how was the chicken? I said, how you know that was chicken? He said, some of my members gave me some one time and sure was good. I said, you better stop eating no white folk food and make you sick. He said, I see you pretty healthy. So we had a good time with him. You know, he was down there, you know, all kind of stories. I believe that you, like Mr. Gardner's farm, one of the campsites, I believe was the 3rd camp, that we could develop those sites that were the original campsite. I believe that would be very helpful and very money-wise. So when the government built a nice interpreting center down on Highway 80, but seemingly didn't get enough volume of business for to keep it operating. I believe it was enough history made at the 4 campsites to change the whole nature of American race policy in America on Highway 80. I believe that if you had programs behind it to teach children at the time we're living in now of the history that caused them to be in where they are now, it'd be very helpful, because without those improvements in the black community and acceptance in America, it made a major change. But they have to be taught, and how valuable it's going to be to teach the children what we went through at that time for them to get some improvement out of that. Well, how much of our success has been by accident. See, when they killed Jose Williams and Jose Williams' nephew down there in the little town below Selma, and when they killed him, and they were going to bring his body back to Montgomery to dramatize the injustice of race in America. But some kind of way, Reverend Ivy, they turned into the march from Selma to Montgomery. So I think a man named the ball head fella in the Supreme Rights Movement. So let's march back to Montgomery. That was in the church there. And so that was one of the things who inspired the march, just to dramatize the injustice of the killing. But when George Wallace sent his team, he sent John down to Selma to stop the march, what really helped the black people in the world to see with the TV cameras, because he did not anticipate the TV camera, and that what made it so successful. Without the communication, we wouldn't have it'd be way more horrible thing that black people decided to beating on the Evan Peters Bridge, but it was not dramatic. They'd have showed you when that Ku Klux Klan was being indoctrinated into the Klan, what he had to do to a black man to be accepted. Then that would have made the Selma and Montgomery March look like a Sunday picnic. Well, the family was always unified. There was no hardly difference between injustice, whether black man or black woman. But my family was, Pensacola, where I was originally from, they gave Montgomery a lot of credit for laying the foundation for the whole civil rights movement. It basically started here in Alabama. Civil rights, voting rights, and a Supreme Court decision. And we deserve more credit because I looked at the pictures you got on the wall, Rufus Lewis, E.D. Nixon, Mrs. Williams, all the pictures, Abenaki. So they were the leaders of the march. So it changed not only for Alabama, for the whole United States. I guess Lyndon Johnson being president, he was a Southerner. I guess he's going to show the nation that I'm a Southerner, how white, black people feel about me. I'm going to give them something. And he gave us a civil right to vote around the Supreme Court decision. But then when Reverend King preached that sermon at the Riverside Church and denounced the Vietnam War, then things started happening. Then he came by the barbershop that was in April 1967. He came by the barbershop when he preached the 90th anniversary sermon at Dexter. And while he was in town for that day, he came by the barbershop. One of the professors at Alabama State said, Reverend King, I read about your sermon at the Riverside Church in New York where you denounced the war in Vietnam. Reverend King said, yeah, I'm a preacher of the cloth, and Lyndon Johnson's a politician. But then that man said, also, you're going to get killed. And we didn't pay much attention to the man, the professor at Alabama State, the man you can get killed. And sure enough, he went to Memphis, Tennessee 4 months later, and he was killed. So then it came back to me because the man told me you're going to get killed, but it didn't make any sense. But then in his sermon, his last sermon, he says, I've been to the mountaintop, I've looked over, I've seen the promised land. I might not be there with you, but you get there one day and the next day it blows his head off. So I was just wondering, did he really know in that sermon that he was going to get killed as soon as he did, the very next day? Then I just thought, the man told me, said, you're going to get killed. But we didn't pay any attention to that. That's just a statement people make, Man didn't know nobody knew when he was going to get killed anyway. But I was just thought about the sermon. I've been to the mountaintop. I've seen the promised land. I might not be there with you, but you get it. That was really struck me. And when the news came out, I was cutting the man's hair that he stayed with when he came back to Montgomery, lived in Mobile Heights. Richmond Smilers. They were members of Southern King fraternity and all the other. That's where he stayed after he came back many times. And that's when I was cutting his hair. And when the telephone rang, they asked me was Richmond. I said, he's in the chair, telling Reverend King being killed. And he all fell out of the chair almost not just out of the ground, just the two of us in the shop at the time when he got the news. Well, it was very, very sad by him being a customer and plus a historical figure. We went to the funeral, in the line of Bibbins and Dr. Love, we all went together. And it was a very sad day, for a person of his notoriety to be killed like that. He was very, very sad, The funeral was, all the VIPs were there. We just had all the restaurants. We had to stay in Atlanta all that day, and we didn't get anything to eat until the night. We was on our way back coming down the highway, and we stopped at a service station. I bought every peanut butter cracker in the store. Well, the funeral home, oh yeah, well, they played a part. Yeah. They let some of their cars be used for transportation. When they see you walking, they was a cooperation, they give you a ride, If you're going one direction, they give you a ride, and vice versa. That's right, yeah. Oh yeah, these are pictures from Selma to Montgomery. This one was Andrew Young. He got to be later on the mayor. This was Mrs. and Mrs. King. This was on Highway 80 and 31 when it was coming in. This was the police department. This was the NBC sound truck. All this happened at St. Jude that night. Lawrence Johnson, one of the first black policemen. This was the police station downtown. And the Reverend and Mrs. King, they was in front of the march. And the first black Nobel Peace Prize winner, I can't think of his name right now, but we marched, when Reverend King, when we were downtown, and when the marchers, we couldn't see around the corner, we were down there where Court Square, and we said, here come the marchers, here come the marchers. So we thought Reverend King and Abenaki would be leading the march, but guess who led the march? The white colonel on that Jeep. And them helicopters on that morning for the marchers, them helicopters were flying over I lived in Carver Park. So it's really the military at that march. And Lyndon Johnson said, if anybody do anything to them black people, what are he gonna do? And he had the 101 Airborne stationed at Maxwell Field, just stand by just in case they was needed. So two of my customers taught math on the bed. And they saw these civilians getting off this military airplane with civilian clothes. They said, what is this going on? But they found out they flew them in civilian clothes just in case, and standby just in case they were needed. So Lyndon Johnson ain't gonna be no shooting today. And he had the United States Army to protect that march. And that made me feel real good that they did that. And said he had 5,000 soldiers at Fort Bragg, Bennett, and standby to protect the marches. Because they had planned on a massacre coming through the swamps of Selma. But Lyndon Johnson ain't gonna be no shooting today. And the word got out, and that's what that was taken. That's when I had a lot of respect for Lyndon Johnson because of the 3 bills that came under his administration. Well, you had very little television at the time. Well, like I said, the television camera who really made the march. When you can see an actual picture of what's going on and by talking is one level of consideration, but when you actually see the actual picture of horses and tear gas running over people, see, that was real. Without that, because they did way more horrible things to black people, but it was not televised. Television was a major part of the movement that helped us do what we did. Without that, like right now, if you want to be highly educated, you got to go AI. The time just keep on changing. You can't stop the time of change. Then it was no longer profitable, during that time to keep segregation because you're going to go downtown now to eat, baby. You got to go. You need to eat at a corporation business. See, the Army gave us our protection, basically. But when they called the United States Army, because that morning I followed them helicopter flying over my backyard. I said, oh, me. There ain't gonna be no shooting. There ain't gonna be no killing today. See, you got to have money and strength. That's the whole purpose of what's going on in Washington now. See, the man, they got money and he got the power of that position. All we could do is what we're doing now, just talking about it until we could get him out. But he's gonna stay there because that money and that position gonna keep him. And this is the march started at my barbershop. John Lewis, James Farmer, Reverend Douglas. He got less coverage. Reverend Douglas, he was in Alabama. And that was King. You remember James Farmer in Abernacle? Because this Reverend King, last sermon he preached in Montgomery in December 1967. The Dexter Church invited him back to preach the 90th anniversary sermon of the church. And while he was in town that day, I got a chance to come by the barbershop. And that's a picture of me in the November Club. And that while he was in the barbershop that day, one of the men told him, said, Reverend King, I read about your sermon at the Riverside Church in New York where you went against Lyndon Johnson foreign policy. Reverend King said, that's right. He said, Lyndon Johnson did a lot for black people. But he said, when you play in the American foreign policy, something might happen. He said, you might get killed. So Reverend King didn't pay much attention to it. So anyway, that was December of '67. So in April of 1968, he went to Memphis, Tennessee, and sure enough, he was killed. This symbol is Reverend King's fraternity here in Montgomery. All those on the picture, and most of those people on this picture was the faculty members of Alabama State College. That was his fraternity. That's Reverend and Mrs. King right up on the front. And that's Andrew Young directing traffic. This time on 31 and 80. That's when the march was coming in. That's Miss and Mrs. King. And that's Andrew Young right here. And this was the Army. The whole city was based under that jurisdiction. And this was Lawrence Carter. He was one of the first black policemen. And this was the NBC sound truck at St. Jude Catholic Church that night. That was the sound truck for the entertainers. This is the police department. This is where the march was coming in off of 80 into 31.